The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept it, hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is already day 6 of the 7-day sesshin. In fact, it's about 2/3 of the way through day 6. In March 2019 at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to share a little bit more from the book Mind at Ease, Self-Liberation Through Mahamudra Meditation. Mahamudra meditation, as we explained earlier in sharing other parts of this book, is one of the two, the other one being Dzogchen, kinds of practices that is most like Zen in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And today's going to be a kind of a challenging one to express, because it's about the ground of being. It's about our true nature, and how it's not exactly what people would call a soul, because the soul, as it's mostly conceived of, unless you allow it some flexibility, is considered something rigid that just pops in and out of bodies. Comes in at birth and goes out at death, and then pops into another body. And that's not really the way we experience it in Buddhism. So let me share what is written in this book. And the first thing I want to say is that our true nature, about the closest description we can give to it, is luminous transparency. Luminous transparency. Even that is an attempt to fix it into some kind of form, which it's not accurate. But luminous transparency is as close as we can get to it. If something is luminous and transparent, there's nothing it can attach to or be attached to, and that's important. So let me share this. The clear light, or the Buddha nature itself, is not the person or a sentient being, but the basis of such a being. The basis of such a being, and yet it's not separate. We go back to that metaphor of being like the ocean and the waves on the top of the ocean. And yet the depth of the ocean is still water, all of it's water, the waves and the depths. But the waves are unmoved, profound, deep. The waves are differentiated. Sometimes there's foam, sometimes they're huge. I remember the one day we had in Hawaii when we took a boat from San Francisco to Hong Kong on our way to living in Thailand. And we rented a car and drove around the island. And by the way, that car was quite the budget car. It didn't have rear view mirrors, and it had some strange way of connecting the seat belts that made it very difficult to get out from under them at the end of the trip. Anyway, we drove all the way around the island, including the side of the island where there's a great deal of wind, and the waves were phenomenal. The power of the waves was phenomenal. They were huge and towering, and it was amazing to see people actually surfing them. Could not imagine how they could get out there, because these were like standing waves, except for the fact that they looked like they were about 50 feet tall, and yet people were somehow able to surf them, even though if they did something wrong or misguided, it looked like the water could simply crush them. So you could say that the waves are our individuality, our apparent separateness. But the true nature is not really separate from that. It's the fundamental basis of all that is. And everything has the Buddha nature, or that clear light as it's also called. The clear light or the Buddha nature is not the person or a sentient being, but the basis of such a being. It is part of the consciousness and is therefore the basis of a designation of a sentient being, of the self or a person, but it is not the self itself. Buddha nature is not and has never been thought of as some kind of unchanging psychic substance, because it's not a thing. So how can it be changing or unchanging? Luminous transparency. How can we fix something solid onto that description? Luminous transparency. Buddha nature is not and has never been thought of as some kind of unchanging psychic substance. Buddha nature is that element in the consciousness that remains resistant to the delusory workings of the mind. The notion of an essentially undiluted consciousness is not an invention of Mahayana Buddhism. The Buddha himself made references to this idea in his early discourses. For example, in the Pali Sutta Nugattara Nikaya, the Buddha had this to say about the essence of consciousness being luminous and pure and immune to defiling tendencies. Luminous and pure and immune to defiling tendencies. This innate perfection cannot be defiled. A fundamental beingness of who we are is perfect, clear, pure. But because we don't recognize it, because we haven't experienced it, because we're caught in all kinds of ideas and thoughts and emotions and reactions, we assume that the ideas, thoughts, emotions, and reactions are who we really are. And so we live a life that is characterized by periodic joy, happiness, and the rest of the time it's pain and suffering. Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. There is a story of this very wealthy man who lived in a great house, and one evening, there's a knock on the door, and he goes and opens the door, and there's this absolutely gorgeous young woman standing out there. And she says, "May I come in?" And he says, "Of course you may come in." And shortly thereafter, there's another knock on the door, and he goes, and there's this really wretched-looking, awful person. And she kind of growls, "Can I come in?" And he says, "No way, get lost. I have no room for you." And she says, "I have to come in. My sister is here. Wherever she goes, I go too. Her name is pleasure, and my name is pain." But there are ways to see through this, to encounter that ground of being, and to live from that, seeing through the things that cause pain and letting them go because we see through them. We see how empty they are. When we hear this, we may think, "Oh my God, that sounds like I'm living up there in a cloud somewhere and I won't be able to function in society." But that's not true at all. When we have had a deep enough glimpse of the true nature of reality, it's as if it anchors us in that fundamental beingness, which, because it's undefiled, naturally we respond to circumstances in clear and appropriate ways. It's not like we get dumb and stupid. Rather, our intellect is able to function far more effectively because it's not inhibited by all the shoulds and oughts and ideas and conditioning. It sees clearly and it responds. Or I should say, we see clearly and we respond. Otherwise, so much of the time, our life is filled with reactivity. Something happens and it is jarring, or it's upsetting, or it's annoying, or it's bothersome in some way. And we don't like to feel that experience, and so we react. It is so common. Right now, how many wars do we have going on in the world? How much dysfunction do we have going on in the world? It's because people are caught in this reactivity. Yet our true nature is clear, luminous transparency. And to function from that basis is tremendously freeing. That is the way we're meant to live. And when we do that, we live in harmony with life. Our intelligence is intact. Our ability to function in any kind of circumstance is clear and functioning well, unhindered by that conditioning. Here, sitting in the Zendo, we have this incredible sharp tool, the Susok'kan, the extended out breath, with which we can reach increasingly deeper. And as part of that reach, begin to see through where we are caught in delusion. And ultimately, if we persist, encounter the experience of that ground of being, which is transformative. Then, of course, we have the further challenge of bringing our life, our activity, into line with what we've realized. Because habit patterns are strong and deep. And we are so often involved in thoughtless knee-jerk reactions to things. So we have to sort of be careful. This is called the long maturation by Torei Enji, who was Hakuin's primary Dharma successor. And it's something that we are working on, not once we have a Kensho experience, but we are working on it even before we start practice. And starting practice enables us to work much more effectively with it and to really gain some traction with it. I remember sitting in my peach-colored bedroom in Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I was 10 years old, feeling despair because I had been trying since I was 6 years old to become a better person. And it didn't seem like I had done a single bit of anything successful in moving in that direction. Somehow there's something about the practice that allows us to see where we're caught, and to, in that seeing and the dismay that it engenders, the disappointment and the remorse, to let it go. And so gradually, as the practice deepens, we open more and more clearly to where we're caught in this cycle of greed, anger, and delusion, and are more and more able to let it go because of this profound, luminous transparency that is our basis. Let's see if there's anything more here. There's a quote from the Buddha. This mind, monks, is luminous, but it is defiled by stains that come from without. But this the uninstructed folk do not understand as it really is. Thus, for the uninstructed folk, there is no cultivation of the mind. I declare that the mind, monks, is luminous and is cleansed of taints that come from without. This the instructed noble disciple understands as it really is. Thus, for the instructed noble disciple, there is cultivation of the mind, I declare. In other words, exactly because these so-called defilements, this dysfunction, this greed, anger, and delusion is not inherent in our mind. It's not the ground of being. It's not touched by these things. And so we have the option of opening to the experience of these challenging mind states, habit patterns, and letting them go because of that innate perfection, because of that luminous transparency. Who we are is fluid, flexible, responsive, and increasingly so the more we let go of greed, anger, and delusion. We have the capacity to become who we really are, because these taints, as he calls them, are not permanent and are not fixed and are not attached. They're things that we've assumed, and of course society sanctions that as well. And certain religions claim that we're even as we're born, we're evil. But this is not the view the Buddha taught. Quite the opposite. Our innate perfection, the very ground of being, is not touched by greed, anger, and delusion. These are only superficial habit patterns that with work, persistence, attention, and increasing awareness, we can let go of little by little and become the beings that we were born as, truly free. Metaphorically, I'd like to share with you some more of Haviz, the Persian poet, the Sufi poet, who came a couple of centuries after Rumi, and wrote, as you heard before, in metaphor, because it was too dangerous because of the fundamentalist environment in Iran at the time to speak the truth out loud and clearly, so it was done in metaphor. This one is entitled, How Does It Feel to Be a Heart? Once a young woman asked me, how does it feel to be a man? And I replied, my dear, I'm not so sure. Then she said, well, aren't you a man? And this time I replied, I view gender as a beautiful animal that people often take for a walk on a leash and might enter in some odd contest to try to win strange prizes. My dear, a better question for Hafiz would have been, how does it feel to be a heart? For all I know is love, and I find my heart infinite and everywhere. I find my heart infinite and everywhere. Luminous transparency. This is called Awake a While. Awake a while, it does not have to be forever, right now. One step upon the sky's soft skirt would be enough. Hafiz, awake a while, just one true moment of love will last for days. Rest all your elaborate plans and tactics for knowing him, for they all just frozen spring buds, far, so far from summer's divine gold. Awake, my dear, be kind to your sleeping heart. Take it into the vast fields of light and let it breathe. Say, love, give me back my wings. Lift me nearer. Say to the sun and moon, say to our dear friend, I will take you up now, beloved, on that wonderful dance you promised. And this one is titled, There is a Wonderful Game. There's a game we should play, and it goes like this. We hold hands and look into each other's eyes and scan each other's face. Then I say, now tell me a difference you see between us. And you might respond, Haviz, your nose is 10 times bigger than mine. Then I would say, yes, my dear, almost 10 times. But let's keep playing. Let's go deeper. Go deeper. For if we do, our spirits will embrace and interweave. Our union will be so glorious that even God will not be able to tell us apart. There's a wonderful game we should play with everyone. And it goes like this. And then, lastly, this is titled, It Cuts the Plow Reins. By the way, I'm sharing this from a book called I Heard God Laughing, renderings of Hafiz by Daniel Ladinsky, who is himself a Sufi. What does purity do? It cuts the plow reins. It frees you from working and dining in the mud. It frees you from living behind a big ox that is always breaking wind. What can purity do, my dear? It can lift your heart on a rising, bucking sun that makes the soul hunger to reach the roof of creation. It offers what the whole world wants, real knowledge and power. It offers what the wise craves, the priceless treasure of freedom with a capital F. Pure, divine love is no meek priest or tight banker. It will smash all your windows and only then throw in the holy gifts. It will allow you to befriend life and light and sanity, and not even mind waking to another day. It reveals the excitement of the present and the beauty of precision. It confers vitality and a sublime clarity, until finally all the heart can do is burst open with great love and laughter. Oh purity, oh dear truth and friend within me, why didn't you tell me sooner you could do all this? Cut the reins of illusion, so we can all just go wild, loving God and everyone all day. I hope these readings have given you some sense of something deeper that lies within you, that if you open to it, will be unbelievably freeing. Freeing so that you can express your innate compassion, wisdom, joy, wisdom. Don't believe that you won't be able to work efficiently, caringly, and truly well if you do that. Because it gets the friction out of the way. Our life is so much more smooth when we can live in that way. But we can't just decide to live that way and have it happen just because we decide to live that way. We need to make use of the tools. The main tool being the Susok'kan, which can carry this innate yearning to return to that luminous transparency, to that true self that is no self, but is the basis of all that is. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.